Okay, today's lesson is trying to make some sense out of all the different line choices that we have available today. You know, I remember back in the day when I was tournament fishing, we basically had two choices, trilene and stren. That was it. We had different poundages, you know, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, then it jumped to 17, 20, and I think 25 after that. So we had those kind of choices, but we basically had monofilament line, trilene, stren. That was pretty much it. Today, my goodness, we have lead core line to help you troll. We got actual trolling line. We got the new stuff called fluorocarbon and the really new stuff called braid. You can buy a line that's, you know, you can get 100 yards on a spool. This spool has 3,000 yards on it. It's amazing when you walk into a store. And if you've done that recently, you know, it's like, how do you make sense out of all that? So what I want to do is I want to cover some very basic stuff very quickly with you to help you make the right choice for your fishing. Now, let's start with the fact that there are some negatives with monofilament. Number one, it absorbs water. So over time, that's not a good thing, obviously. Number two, it floats. So if you're going to use a lure like a crankbait or a jig or a worm that's going to, you know, you're trying to get deeper in the water column, you got a problem because you're always going to be fighting this line, which is always wanting to float instead of sink. And number three, it's got stretch in it. So you put out 20, 25 yards of line, you set the hook, it's amazing how much stress, or how much stretch, rather, is in monofilament line. Now, along comes fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon took those negatives of monofilament and fixed them. For example, it doesn't absorb water. It's, unlike monofilament, it sinks. And unlike monofilament, there's no stretch. So when you set the hook, it's there. There's nothing between us. In other words, that line's not going to stretch out on fluorocarbon. It's an instantaneous hook set and therefore increases your feel as well. Then you go to braid. And what braid did was it basically took some of the positives of fluorocarbon and made it even more positive in that, primarily in that the diameter of it. I mean, the stuff is so strong yet so small in diameter. For example, this is a 30-pound Tess braided line, yet has the diameter of an 8-pound Tess monofilament. Okay, so and by the way, and it sinks. Now the negative to that is that you can't just use it directly and tie it to the lure. You have to have some type of leader attached to it. You've got to tie a monofilament or a fluorocarbon leader in order to be able to use it. A lot of people use it for things like I do, which is a Carolina rig. I got hooked up on a Carolina rig where I want that lure on the bottom and I want to have a lot of feel, but a lot of people also use it on spinning equipment because it has no memory. That's the other advantage over fluorocarbon, which has memory, although not as much as monofilament. By memory, here's what I'm saying. If you've ever used a spinning outfit, you know that sooner or later that line's going to spool off and roll off, we call it, and kind of backlash, and it just ruins the whole thing, right? You don't have that with this because there's no memory. So it's a great thing to use on spinning equipment. Let's talk about what I use and why I use it. Maybe this will help you. To be honest, if I'm fishing shallow water, 1 foot, 5 foot, down to maybe 7 or 8 foot, and I'm throwing, say, a crankbait, for example, I'm still throwing monofilament. I kind of like the fact that it's got a little bit of stretch to it, because when I get a hard hit, a lot of times close to the boat, okay, on a crankbait, I know you've had that, or close to the shore, it gives it a little bit more of a shock absorbency to it, to have a little bit more stretch. So I don't mind that at all. A lot of people wouldn't like that. They don't agree with me, but that's what I do, and it's cheaper. So if I'm fishing shallow water, I'm generally still fishing, you know, the monofilament, including small crankbaits. If I'm fishing deeper than that, or I'm fishing a worm or a jig, you know, I'm throwing fluorocarbon. To me, this is the best all-around purpose line in today's environment that's available to us. If I'm going deeper than that, like on a Carolina rig, I've got braid on there. Would I recommend that for the normal guy? Probably not. You can go buy some fluorocarbon. It's certainly cheaper. No reason at all to have to put braid on there. It just happens to be what I have. So here's what I would say to you is this. You got to remember that when you throw your lure out to a bank and you start working that lure down to that bank, that monofilament line that you're so used to using, it floats. And so you're going to get a bend like that in monofilament. So when you try to set the hook deeper than 8 or 10 feet particularly, you've got this big bend in there. and that worm or that jig is down, trying to feel the bottom, is constantly working against that floating line, that monofilament. Same with a crankbait. If you're throwing a big deep diving crankbait, it's constantly having to work against that big loop in your line, because that line wants to float. So what I say is, if you're going to fish deeper than 8 or 9 or 10 feet, or anytime fishing with a jig or a worm where you need to feel that bottom and have better contact, throw fluorocarbon, because fluorocarbon gives you a straight line right to that lure. As you work that lure down further and further into the water column, you always have a straight line contact, if you will, with that lure. Because there's no stretch, you get a better hook set, you get a better feel for it. So my recommendation is this: use monofilament when you can, because it's cheaper for the weekend angler. Okay, that's what I would tell you. Shallow water, nothing wrong with mono. My goodness, I've caught thousands of fish, including in tournaments, long before they ever came out with fluorocarbon. You want to take your fishing to the next level of feel and contact and hook setting capabilities. In my opinion, go to fluorocarbon. Watt pound test, I would tell you I generally never use anything other than 10 or 12 when we're talking about crankbaits. And I'm just stuck on 15-pound tests when you're talking about worms and jigs or anything else that's heavy that I'm working across the bottom. So, a couple of things: 10 to 12-pound tests for your crankbaits, 15 for your worm rod. You're all set. Braid, I'm sorry, I know it has its applications, but to be honest with you, for most of us, most of the time, that's $17 for that braid. Yes, it'll last for basically forever, and yes, you can peel it off, turn it around, and rewind it and use the other end of it. I know all that, and maybe you do too, but at the end of the day, it's like, why? If I don't really need it, why would I particularly want to use it? So for most of us, monofilament, shallow water, fluorocarbon, anything deeper than 8 to 10 feet, or anytime you're throwing a deep diving crankbait, plastic worm, or a jig. Hope that helps. Till next time, we'll see you.